Before we dive into this emotional and eye-opening journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button on Behind the Symptoms for more dramatic, real-life stories that can change your perspective on health and life. Megan had always been the picture of health. At 29, she was active, social, and had a career she loved. She had a partner she adored, and the idea of starting a family with him was something they both had talked about for months. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and Megan's would come in the form of a diagnosis she never saw coming. It all started during her routine prenatal checkup. Megan, like any expectant mother, had been eagerly awaiting this moment. She was in the early stages of her pregnancy, just shy of 10 weeks, and the excitement of her first ultrasound was building up. She couldn't wait to hear the heartbeat, see that tiny blob on the screen, and experience the magic that so many other mothers had spoken about. However, the news she received that day was anything but magical. Dr. Stevens, her OB-GYN, had been conducting the usual routine tests, blood work, urine analysis, and a screening for infections. She had asked a few questions about Megan's sexual health history, as all OB-GYNs do during these visits. Megan, having always been open and honest about her health, didn't think much of it when Dr. Stevens brought up herpes simplex virus, HSV. "Have you ever been diagnosed with herpes?" Dr. Stevens asked, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. Megan froze. She had never been diagnosed with herpes, nor had she ever had any symptoms. Her mind raced, trying to recall any moment in her past where she could have been exposed to the virus. "No," Megan replied hesitantly, "I've never had any issues with herpes." The doctor nodded but seemed to take a mental note. "All right, I'm going to have you tested for it. It's important for us to know if you've been exposed, especially since you're pregnant." Megan was confused. Her pregnancy was supposed to be a joyous time, not one filled with worry and questions. But as Dr. Stevens explained the importance of testing for herpes during pregnancy, Megan began to feel a pit in her stomach. She didn't know much about herpes beyond what she had heard in passing conversations and the occasional public service announcement on TV. She knew that it was a common viral infection, but that was about it. How could something like this affect her pregnancy? Wasn't it something that only affected people who had cold sores or genital sores? Dr. Stevens assured her that the virus could remain dormant in the body for long periods and might not show symptoms at all. She explained that many people who had herpes didn't even realize they carried the virus. For pregnant women, the risks were more significant. If a woman was infected with herpes during pregnancy, it could lead to complications for the baby, especially if the virus was contracted during the third trimester. Megan left the appointment feeling uneasy. It was just a test, right? No big deal. But as the days passed and she anxiously awaited her results, a nagging thought kept lingering in her mind. What if I have it? She tried to push it aside, focusing instead on her growing belly and the excitement of being a mom. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something might be wrong. A few days later, Megan's phone rang. It was Dr. Stevens' office. Megan's heart skipped a beat as she answered. "Megan, it's Dr. Stevens. I have the results of your herpes test." The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "I'm afraid you tested positive for herpes simplex virus type 2, or HSV-2. Megan's mind went blank. Positive? How could that be? She had no symptoms, no outbreaks, no warning signs. "How is this possible?" The doctor continued. "This doesn't necessarily mean that you're experiencing an outbreak right now, but it does mean that you carry the virus. And since you're pregnant, I want to discuss the potential risks with you so we can take the appropriate steps to ensure your pregnancy remains healthy." Megan sat there, stunned. She had never once suspected that something like this could affect her life in such a profound way. She'd always been careful, always been diligent about her health and well-being. But now, this virus, which she had no clue she even had, was threatening the one thing she had always wanted, a healthy pregnancy. As the conversation continued, Dr. Stevens explained how herpes could affect a pregnancy, particularly during delivery. If a woman had an active outbreak during labor, there was a risk of passing the virus on to the baby during delivery, which could cause severe complications. In some cases, it could even be life-threatening for the newborn, but the risks weren't just related to delivery. Megan learned that if she had been exposed to the virus during pregnancy, there could be potential effects on the baby's development, even in the early stages. The virus could lead to miscarriage, premature birth, or, in rare cases, birth defects. It was a sobering reality that Megan had never even considered before. Dr. Stevens reassured her that there were treatments available to manage the virus during pregnancy and that, with the right precautions, Megan could still have a healthy baby. But the uncertainty lingered. Would she pass the virus to her baby? Would there be long-term consequences for her child? And most importantly, how could she live with the knowledge that she carried a virus that could impact her pregnancy in such a profound way? Megan's world felt like it had shifted beneath her feet. The excitement of motherhood was now overshadowed by fear and confusion. She knew she had to take action, but what did that even look like? How would this virus affect her, her baby, and her future? The next few weeks were filled with doctor's appointments, consultations with specialists, and hours of research on her own. Megan was determined to learn everything she could about HSV-2 and how it could impact her pregnancy. And yet, the more she learned, the more she realized how little she truly knew about herpes and pregnancy. In the coming days, Megan would face many tough decisions. But it was only just the beginning of a long and emotional journey. One that would change the way she looked at her pregnancy, her health, and her future. As the days went by, Megan couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she had with Dr. Stevens. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the words, "You tested positive for herpes simplex virus type 2, or HSV-2. The emotional weight of it all felt heavy, like a constant pressure on her chest. She spent hours Googling herpes and pregnancy risks, scrolling through forums, reading stories from other women who had faced the same challenges. Some stories offered hope, others made her stomach turn. She learned that herpes was more common than she had ever imagined. Nearly 1 in 6 people in the U.S. had genital herpes, according to the CDC. It was a silent virus, often lying dormant in people's systems, causing no symptoms at all. Yet, when it reared its ugly head, it could wreak havoc on a person's life, particularly when pregnant. The more Megan read, the more questions she had. She had never noticed any signs or symptoms, but could she have been shedding the virus without even knowing it? Was her partner at risk? Could he have been the one to transmit the virus to her without even knowing he had it? So many unknowns. So much uncertainty. Her partner, Luke, was a source of support, but Megan could tell he was just as shaken as she was. When she first told him about her diagnosis, his face had gone pale and his eyes were filled with concern. He had been by her side through everything, through the excitement of finding out they were pregnant, the joy of feeling the baby's first flutter, but now, the uncertainty about her herpes diagnosis clouded their future. "Megan, what does this mean for the baby? Are we going to be okay?" Luke asked one night, after they had spent hours talking about her diagnosis. Megan didn't have the answers. She wished she did. She had read about the risks, how HSV-2 could be passed to the baby during delivery if the mother had an active outbreak, but what if she didn't have an outbreak? Could the virus still cause problems? Could it affect the baby even in the earliest stages of pregnancy? The more Megan thought about it, the more it consumed her. She felt guilty. Was she putting her baby at risk? How could she have been so careless? Had she exposed her child to something so dangerous without even realizing it? The questions swirled around in her mind, making her feel helpless and overwhelmed. Luke tried to comfort her, but Megan felt like a failure. She had always been careful. She had always taken care of her health, and now this? It didn't seem fair. She thought about the future and wondered if the virus would always be a shadow hanging over her. Would she have to worry about outbreaks for the rest of her life? Would this one diagnosis change everything? The guilt and fear only intensified when she realized that her friends and family had no idea what she was going through. How could she explain this to them? How could she tell them that something as common as herpes was now threatening her pregnancy? Her best friend, Sarah, called one afternoon to check in. Megan had been avoiding her calls for a few days. She didn't know how to tell Sarah about her diagnosis. She had never even mentioned herpes to Sarah before, and now the thought of explaining it felt like a mountain too high to climb. "Hey, Meg, you've been kind of distant. Is everything okay? How's the pregnancy going?" Sarah asked, concern in her voice. Megan sighed, unsure how to answer. She could feel the lump in her throat. She didn't want to burden Sarah with her worries, but she also couldn't keep it all inside anymore. "Actually, Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," Megan began, her voice shaky. "I tested positive for herpes, and I'm really scared about what it means for the baby." There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone before Sarah spoke. "Wait, what? Herpes? But you don't have cold sores or anything, right?" Megan shook her head. even though Sarah couldn't see her. "I don't have any symptoms. I never have. But I'm still worried. I don't know what it means for my pregnancy. Dr. Stevens said there are risks, and I don't know if I can handle them." Sarah's tone softened. "Oh, Meg, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But you're not alone. Okay? I'm here for you, and I'll help you through this. We'll figure it out together." Megan couldn't help but cry. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear those words. It was like a weight had been lifted, just knowing that someone understood and cared. That evening, Megan and Luke sat down together to make a plan. They knew they needed to gather more information and speak to a specialist to fully understand what they were dealing with. But there was also the emotional toll that weighed heavily on both of them. They had been so excited about starting their family, but now, everything felt uncertain. Dr. Stevens had assured Megan that with proper treatment and monitoring, she could still have a healthy pregnancy. She was prescribed antiviral medication to suppress the herpes virus and reduce the risk of an outbreak. The doctor also advised Megan to avoid any sexual contact during her pregnancy, especially during the final weeks leading up to delivery, when the risk of transmitting the virus to the baby would be highest. But Megan couldn't shake the feeling that this diagnosis would forever change her experience as a mother. She had always imagined a perfect pregnancy, one where she could bask in the glow of motherhood without fear. But now, her every move felt shadowed by the possibility of an outbreak, the looming threat of passing the virus onto her baby. The emotional roller coaster had only just begun, and with each passing day, Megan would face new challenges, new fears, and new questions. But she was determined to not let this diagnosis define her. She was going to fight for her health, for her baby's health, and for the family she had always dreamed of having. Megan thought she had a handle on things. She had started taking her antiviral medication, attended all her follow-up appointments with Dr. Stevens, and was being as cautious as possible. But despite all her efforts to stay calm and positive, there was still one nagging fear that never quite went away. What if I have an outbreak? The anxiety of potentially having an active outbreak haunted her. She knew that if she did, there would be no choice but to deliver her baby via cesarean section to avoid passing the virus onto her child. The possibility of major surgery, not to mention the risks to her baby's health, made her stomach churn with fear. Megan tried to keep herself distracted. She focused on the baby, doing everything she could to prepare for the new arrival. She and Luke decorated the nursery, went to prenatal classes, and discussed baby names. The excitement of bringing a child into the world was still there, but the looming possibility of an outbreak was always just beneath the surface of every happy moment. One evening, when Megan was about 26 weeks along, she began to feel a strange sensation. It was subtle but unmistakable. There was a tingling feeling, almost like an itch, around the area where she knew the virus could cause an outbreak. Megan's heart sank. She had felt it before, a slight warning sign that an outbreak was about to begin. She quickly went to the bathroom, checking the area, and sure enough, she could see the first signs of an outbreak. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment she had feared had arrived. Megan immediately contacted Dr. Stevens' office. Her anxiety skyrocketed as she waited for the callback, her hands trembling. What was she supposed to do now? Was it too late for the antiviral medication to work? Could it be that all her efforts had been for nothing? Was this going to put her baby in immediate danger? Dr. Stevens called her back within the hour. "Megan, I'm so sorry to hear that you're experiencing an outbreak, but don't panic," she reassured her in her calm, soothing voice. "This is why we monitor closely. You're still early enough in your pregnancy that we can take precautions to minimize the risk to the baby." The doctor explained that the key was to get the virus under control as soon as possible. Megan would need to double down on her antiviral medication, and they would carefully monitor her progress over the next few days. She was also advised to avoid contact with Luke and to take extra precautions to prevent any further exposure to the virus. The goal now is to suppress the outbreak as quickly as possible. We may also need to schedule a cesarean delivery depending on how things progress. Dr. Stevens added. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll take it step by step. Despite the reassurance, Megan felt a wave of frustration wash over her. This wasn't how she had imagined her pregnancy going. She had done everything right. She had followed all the advice, been diligent with her health, and still, it felt like her body was betraying her. Luke, too, felt helpless. He had been so supportive during this journey, but there was nothing he could do to make her feel better or to stop the outbreak from happening. He stayed by her side as they both tried to process what this new development meant. As the days went on, Megan's symptoms became more pronounced. The pain and discomfort from the outbreak made it difficult to concentrate, and her anxiety continued to climb. She had to adjust her daily routine, stay away from the things that she loved, and focus solely on managing the situation. She also couldn't ignore the nagging thought that the virus might continue to affect her pregnancy in ways that she couldn't predict. How would this impact her delivery? Was she at risk of further complications? Would her baby be safe? Her emotional health was also beginning to take a toll. She was already struggling with the fear of passing the virus onto her baby, and now she had to contend with the physical discomfort that came with an active outbreak. Megan was exhausted, both mentally and physically. The stress was wearing her down, and she found herself unable to enjoy the parts of pregnancy that should have been joyful. Luke tried to comfort her as best as he could, but there were no words that could truly ease her fears. He held her hand and reassured her that they would get through it together, but Megan couldn't shake the feeling that she had let him down. She had always prided herself on being healthy, in control, and prepared for life's challenges. But this was different. This was something she had never expected, something completely out of her control. One afternoon, as Megan was resting on the couch, Luke came to her with some good news. "I've been doing some research," he said, his voice tentative. "I know you're overwhelmed, but I think it might help to focus on something positive." Megan sat up, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I found a support group online," Luke explained. "It's for women who are dealing with herpes during pregnancy. They share their experiences and advice, and it sounds like it could be really helpful for you." Megan was skeptical. How could talking to other women online make her feel better? But as she listened to Luke describe the support group, something shifted within her. Maybe hearing other stories would help her feel less isolated. Maybe she wasn't the only one going through this. That night, Megan joined the group. She read post after post from women who had faced similar challenges, women who had lived with herpes for years, some who had experienced outbreaks during pregnancy, others who had successfully managed the virus while having healthy babies. Each story gave her a little more hope, a little more reassurance. One woman wrote, "It's not easy, but it's possible to have a healthy pregnancy with herpes. You just have to be vigilant, take care of yourself, and trust the process. You're not alone." Megan felt a warmth in her chest. These women, despite their different circumstances, had all walked a similar path. They had faced their fears, fought through the tough days, and come out the other side. Megan realized that she didn't have to do this alone. There was a community of women who understood, who had been where she was, and who could offer the support she so desperately needed. Though the fear didn't completely disappear, Megan began to feel a little more empowered. She had a plan. She had a support system. And most importantly, she knew she could handle whatever came next. As Megan entered her third trimester, things began to feel even more intense. Her outbreak had subsided thanks to the increased antiviral medication, and her follow-up tests showed no signs of active viral shedding. Dr. Stevens was cautiously optimistic, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. "Megan, you're doing great," she told her during a routine checkup. "But as we approach delivery, we have to be extra careful. If there's even a hint of an active outbreak near your due date, we're going to recommend a C-section. It's all about keeping your baby safe." Megan nodded. She had already made peace with the idea that her birth plan might not go the way she had originally dreamed. No water birth, no cozy moments laboring at home before rushing to the hospital. Just sterile lights, a cold operating room, and surgical precision. It wasn't what she wanted, But if it meant protecting her baby, she would do it 1,000 times over. Still, the thought of surgery terrified her. Luke tried to keep her spirits up. He installed the car seat, practiced swaddling techniques, and even read baby books aloud at night, trying to make Megan laugh. She appreciated his efforts more than she could say. Without Luke's constant reassurance, she wasn't sure she could have kept it together. The support group had also become her lifeline. Megan posted updates about her pregnancy journey, and women from all over the country cheered her on. "You've got this! Healthy mom, healthy baby. That's what matters. One step at a time, Megan. You're almost there." But the anxiety would still creep in during the quiet moments. What if the virus comes back? What if I don't recognize the symptoms in time? What if something happens to the baby anyway? One evening, around 36 weeks, Megan noticed a slight tingling sensation again. It was faint, barely there, but it sent her spiraling into panic. She immediately called Dr. Stevens. "I don't know if it's real or if I'm just paranoid," Megan said, her voice tight with fear. "But I think I might be feeling something again." Dr. Stevens didn't take any chances. "Come in tomorrow. We'll do a physical exam and a viral culture just to be safe." That night, Megan barely slept. She lay awake, feeling every tiny twitch and tingle, wondering if it was the start of another outbreak, or just her mind playing tricks on her because of all the stress. Luke stayed up with her, rubbing her back and whispering, "It's going to be okay," over and over again to the appointment the next morning. Dr. Stevens examined her carefully. "No signs of a visible outbreak," she said, frowning slightly. "But let's not take risks. We'll keep you on antivirals, and I'm going to recommend scheduling your C-section for 39 weeks unless something changes." Megan's heart sank a little. She had been holding out hope for a natural delivery if everything stayed quiet. But deep down, she knew this was the safest path forward. "We'll monitor you closely," Dr. Stevens said. "And if anything new comes up, we'll act fast. You're doing everything right, Megan. I'm proud of you." Those words made Megan's eyes well up with tears. Proud of me? She had spent so much time feeling ashamed, guilty, and scared. She hadn't stopped to think that maybe she was actually strong. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Megan finished packing her hospital bag. She washed tiny onesies and folded them into neat stacks. She spent hours imagining what her baby would look like. Would they have her brown hair? Luke's blue eyes? At her final appointment before the scheduled C-section, Megan held her breath as Dr. Stevens did one last exam. "No signs of an outbreak," Dr. Stevens announced with a smile. "You've made it, Megan. It's time to meet your baby." The night before the surgery, Megan sat quietly on the couch, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Luke sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "Are you scared?" he asked softly. "Terrified," she whispered. "But I'm ready." Luke kissed her forehead. "You're the strongest person I know. Our baby is lucky to have you." Megan smiled through her tears. This wasn't the pregnancy journey she had imagined, but it was hers. Messy, complicated, scary, and beautiful. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of the C-section dawned earlier than Megan could have ever imagined. It was still dark outside when she and Luke arrived at the hospital, the cool morning air hitting her face as she stepped out of the car, hospital bag slung over her shoulder. Her nerves buzzed so loudly she thought she might shake apart. The nurses greeted them warmly, helping Megan into a gown and getting her prepped for surgery. They moved through their routine efficiently, checking her vitals, inserting in 4, explaining what would happen step by step. But Megan could barely concentrate. All she could think about was her baby. Please let them be healthy. Please let them be okay. Luke was by her side the entire time, his hands squeezing hers every time her anxiety flared. When it was time to head into the operating room, Megan felt a fresh wave of fear crash over her. But Luke, dressed in his scrubs, leaned down and kissed her. "I'll be right there," he whispered. "We're going to meet our baby." The spinal anesthesia went in smoothly, and within minutes, Megan was lying on the operating table, numb from the chest down but fully awake. A blue curtain was set up in front of her, separating her from the surgical site. Luke sat by her head, holding her hand tightly. Dr. Stevens appeared above her, eyes smiling over her surgical mask. "We're ready, Megan. Let's meet your baby." The next few minutes felt surreal. Megan felt the pressure, tugging, pulling, but no pain. Luke kept talking to her softly, keeping her grounded. She focused on the sound of his voice until a cry, a loud, fierce, beautiful cry that filled the room and filled Megan's heart so full she thought it might burst. "It's a girl," Dr. Stevens announced joyfully. Tears streamed down Megan's face as she turned her head just in time to see a nurse lifting their tiny, squirming, perfect baby over the curtain. The nurse quickly checked the baby, then placed her against Megan's chest, skin-to-skin contact. Megan sobbed, overwhelmed by the rush of love, relief, and wonder. She couldn't believe it. After all the fear, the anxiety, the unknowns, they had made it. "She's perfect," Luke whispered, his voice cracking, and she was. Dark brown hair covered her tiny head, her hands balled into determined little fists, her face scrunching up as she cried her indignation at being brought into the world. They named her Olivia Grace. The days that followed were a blur of healing, feeding, crying, both Megan's and Olivia's, and learning. Megan's C-section recovery was painful, more difficult than she had imagined, but every time she looked at her daughter's face, she knew it was worth it. Tests confirmed that Olivia was healthy and showed no signs of infection. Megan's worst fears had not come true. She had managed her condition, worked with her doctors, and protected her child. Still, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important she had learned along the way, something bigger than just getting through the pregnancy safely. She learned that strength doesn't come from things going perfectly. It comes from facing the things that terrify you and refusing to give up. She also realized how many women, like her, lived with hidden fears about herpes, pregnancy, stigma, or their own health, and how little support there often was. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And Megan knew she wanted to change that. Somehow, one night, as she rocked Olivia to sleep, Megan opened her laptop and wrote her first post for the support group. "Hi, everyone, I just wanted to share some good news. My daughter, Olivia Grace, was born last week, healthy and strong. This journey was not easy. I was terrified most of the way through. I doubted myself. I cried more nights than I can count. But we made it. If you're pregnant and you have herpes, please know this. You are not broken. You are not dirty. You are not a bad mother. You are strong, you are worthy, and you are already doing everything you can to protect your baby. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to ask for help. You're not alone." Her post quickly filled with messages of congratulations, hope, and tears. Megan realized then that sharing her story, even the painful parts, could help others find their strength too. Herpes hadn't defined her. It hadn't defined her pregnancy, and it wouldn't define her motherhood. It was part of her story, but it wasn't the whole story. Holding Olivia close, Megan whispered, "You were worth every fear, every tear, every step," and she meant it with all her heart.